Hi everybody, good evening. I'm coming to you live from Kaunas, from Kovno. Kaunas is a central city here in Lithuania, one of the country's biggest cities. And it's a city of real significant interest from a historic perspective and from a Jewish perspective as well. Kaunas was a city where the Jewish population was a major part of local life and a major part of its heritage and history. Jews lived here for hundreds of years. Interestingly, in the 1700s, there was problems and troubles, and it was Radziwiłł, a famous Polish Lithuanian, who was able to lobby the city mayor and calm things down. But through this period, Jews lived here in this city, and Jews prospered as they did all over Lithuania. Lithuania was a remarkably Jewish country. We all know that Poland had the majority of the Jews. Over 3 million Jews lived in Poland. But the interesting part of here in Lithuania was that whilst the number was less, the influence was really, really great. Jews lived here and were a very active part in local life. You had Jewish parliamentarians and cities that were almost entirely Jewish. Some cities that were really entirely Jewish, others, for example, like Vilnius, that had up to 48% Jews. But here in Kovno, in Kaunas, you had about 28% Jews before the war. Now, the Jewish population here was about 32,000 in the late 1930s. And what happened here during the war is very symbolic. It's very symbolic because it kind of shows what the situation was like for the Lithuanian Jews, for these Litvak Jews. And the story that I'm about to tell you isn't an easy story. In fact, it's a story that I first heard about 4 years ago when I came here for the first time. And I came to this site, and it's one of the stories that I actually remember until today. It's one of the stories, and I tell a lot of stories, and I go to a lot of sites, and I speak about these places, and they're all impactful, and they all mean something, and I tell them so other people can hear them and learn from them as well, and so that we don't forget. But this story really etched into my soul and bothered me to my core, and still bothers me today. And today I've driven all the way from Riga, in Latvia, all the way down to Klaipėda, where we met with the Jewish community with a wonderful exhibition, where we drove up 50 meters to meet with one of the righteous, and 50 kilometers, and down another 150 kilometers to meet with another one of the righteous. These remarkable stories I'll be sharing over the next few days. And on my way back to Vilna, I decided to stop in Kaunas just to visit this site, to pay my respects to this really crucial and important part of heritage and history. So, as all of you will know, and those who have seen it before, Lithuania was under Soviet control at the beginning of the Second World War. The Soviets had come in here and they put vast and difficult measures on the Jewish community and also on the Lithuanian community as well, with many Jews being taken from here and sent to the Gulag, sent to the Soviet-controlled camps, these labor camps, including also Menachem Begin, who ran away from Poland, where he was studying with the Nazi invasion, with the German invasion. He ran towards the Soviet side, hoping that it would be better. And he actually ended up in a prison, in a jail cell in the capital, in Vilnius, for a year, where he was tortured. He spoke about that. He eventually, Begin managed to go from there and was sent out of the jail towards the gulags, and with Anders' army and the agreement that they made with this Polish officer's army. Begin joined Anders' army, as did a lot of other Jews, went through the Persian Gulf, and as they arrived in Palestine was saved. But this is just one example of what happened during those years. And when we think about the Holocaust, we think always about the Nazi death camps, these German Nazi death camps and these German Nazi killing machines. We think about Auschwitz-Birkenau. We think about Sobibor, we think about Majdanek, and we think about these other difficult sites where millions of Jews were mass murdered by the German Nazis. Which is also why this site is so powerful and meaningful to me. The Soviets lost control here. And with Operation Barbarossa, where the German Nazis were able to push their way through, they came here to Kovno and to Lithuania at the end of June 1941. The 25th of June 1941 to be exact. So the German Nazis enter here, and what we saw here was very different to what we'd seen in other countries. And sadly, what we saw in Kovno was indicative of that. Here at this very site was a large gathering area, kind of like this basketball court that you could see behind me when I was talking, which is why I've moved closer so we don't hear everything. And on this very site stood a garage. And on this garage, on the 25th, there are actually debates whether it's 25th or 27th of June 1941, a group of locals brought in a group of Jews and slaughtered the Jews in the most brutal and horrific ways. There are all different accounts as to what exactly happened. One of the accounts that I heard was that the rabbi was sat on a chair. And friends, please excuse me. For those of you, well, for all of us, this is incredibly difficult to hear. And for those who are sensitive, maybe this is a good time to turn off. The rabbi was sat on his chair. They put a Torah scroll in front of him. They pushed him forward and they sawed his head off, alive. Another Lithuanian local smashed and beat dozens of Jews to death on this very site with a metal rod. Beat them to death. But what makes this site even more difficult, if that's possible than that, is that this is the city center. A lot of the places that we would have seen and these sites of mass killing, they happen in fields, they happen far away, in concentration camps, far away from other people. This happened in the city center, and every single account that speaks of this, and again, the details of how the Jews were killed exactly are questions, but what is never questioned on this very site, because there's also pictures that show it, is that when this finished, when this horrendous murder was finished, locals stood beside and cheered. They were happy. Men, women, and children. Lithuanian men, women, and children. Again, they lived in this city. This was a city that was over a quarter Jewish. These people may not have known maybe these exact people, but they knew Jews. And they all stood around and cheered. The brutality, the cruelty, and the evil is something that is unimaginable for any of us today. How a man could be so evil. What kind of person would you have to be to bring your children to watch such a thing? And this happened here. And in the months afterwards, the Jews were then rounded up into the ghettos that were created here. A place where 6,000 Jews were previously living, suddenly hosted 32,000, cramped together in this difficult site. And from there, they were sent to the 9th Fort, a concentration camp not too far away from here, a site of mass murder. And many others brutally murdered by the German Nazis and also by the Lithuanian collaborators. And this illustrious history of Jewish Lithuania. These leaders in Israel that came from here. They speak of Shimon Peres having Lithuanian roots and many, many other Jewish leaders as well. All of this heritage and history gone. In such a short period of time. And this opportunity for us to be here today to remember this and to focus on this and to look at this past and use it as a platform of education. You know, we often speak today, and we Jews say it all the time, we say never again. Never again, never forget, this should never happen to us again. And in my belief, it will never happen to us again. As Jews, this will never happen to us again. And the reason why it will never happen to us again is because we have the state of Israel. Because we have the strongest army in the world. Because we'll take care of ourselves. But the fact is that these killings are happening around the world and they're happening to others. And when we say never again, it's not always about us. And I truly believe that we as Jews who are meant to stand as a Or LeGoyim, as a light amongst the nations, as people who are meant to bring this light to the world, we must learn from this past. Obviously keep the state of Israel strong, because it's imperative. But also to act as a voice of decency, and as a voice that came from the ashes of this, that came from the depths of the most dark and deepest places, and use these kind of horrendous sites as a site to remember, and as a site to make sure that this doesn't happen again for anybody. This is how I feel in places like this. This is why I continue with my mission and make sure that I visit these sites that are public and well known like this with tombstones, but other sites as well. And this is also why I do everything I can to make sure that we record and hear from not just the survivors, who are incredibly important, but also from the saviors, from this small group of righteous heroes, of non-Jews who risked their lives during these times to make sure that this didn't happen to certain people. How righteous would you have to be? Now, it's easy for a lot of us to say, I would have done it. Now, whilst probably most of us wouldn't have been cruel enough to stand by and watch a mass murder taking place, would most of us have risked our lives to save another human being? The answer, as we've seen from history, is probably not. But this is our opportunity to learn from these people. And friends, the story that I'm going to share with you tomorrow of this incredible man who I met today, a 90-year-old Lithuanian man, who truly, his story is one of the most important stories I've ever told. The person he saved went to become one of the most important people in current Jewish history. This story I'll share. And this story juxtaposes this evil. These righteous stood as a beacon of light during the darkest time for humanity. So whilst we have an opportunity to learn never to forget, we must always remember that there were those heroes who stood during this time. This is why I focus on that. Because when I'm talking to my young daughters about the Shoah, about the Holocaust, obviously we talk about these places. We talk about Auschwitz-Birkenau, Sobibor, Majdanek, Chelmno, Stutthof, and all the other German Nazi death camps. But I also teach them about sites like this. But for me, the juxtaposition of sites of such hatred like these, with the greatness of so few, gives my children an understanding of what it means to stand and do what's right. So friends, from here in Kaunas, in Kovno, a place now devoid of Judaism, a small community stands. A place where once was a hub of life and memory memorial, from a site where such cruelty happens. In the end of 1941, not that many years ago, to a place today where people play basketball, maybe remember, maybe don't. We must remember. We must never forget. And we have to make sure that this stands as a testimony for time.